A millionaire receives a letter from a former nanny. What he discovered made him fall into despair. She confessed that. Welcome to the channel. Enjoy the video, give it a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, comment and share. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air as Thomas Bennett, a man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, wiped down the counter of his beloved cafe. It was early morning in Chicago, and the first rays of sunlight were just beginning to peek through the windows of Bennett's Brew, the crown jewel of Thomas's small chain of coffee shops. As he prepared for another day of serving the community he'd grown to love over the past 3 decades, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd woken up with a knot in his stomach, a sense of unease he couldn't quite place. Little did he know his entire world was about to be turned upside down. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked Emily Chen, his 28-year-old manager. Her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced with a look of concern. "Morning, Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice tight. "There's something you need to see." Emily handed Thomas a cream-colored envelope, her hand trembling slightly. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged to Olivia Rodriguez, the woman who had been like a second mother to his son, Adam. Olivia had been their babysitter for years, watching over Adam when he and Sarah, his ex-wife, were busy building their coffee empire. With a furrowed brow, Thomas carefully opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Thomas, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been carrying a burden for far too long, and it's time I shared the truth with you. It's about Adam. There's something you need to know." Thomas's hands shook as he read Olivia's words. The world around him seemed to fade away, the bustling sounds of the cafe muffled by the pounding of his heart. Emily's voice sounded distant as she asked if he was okay. He couldn't believe what he was reading. According to Olivia, Adam, the boy he had raised and loved for 23 years, might not be his biological son. The letter spoke of a fire that had occurred at the cafe 15 years ago, a night that had almost cost Thomas everything he had worked for. But there was more to that night than he had ever known. Memories of that fateful evening came flooding back. The smell of smoke, the sound of sirens, the fear that gripped his heart when he realized 8-year-old Adam had been in the back room of the cafe when the fire broke out. Thomas had always believed it was a miracle that Adam had survived, emerging from the building unscathed, just as the firefighters arrived. But Olivia's letter painted a different picture. She claimed that in the chaos of that night, she had made a decision that would change all their lives forever. The details were vague, but the implication was clear. The Adam who emerged from the fire might not have been the same boy who entered it. Thomas's mind raced. How could this be possible? He had never questioned Adam's identity. The boy had always been the spitting image of Sarah, with her warm brown eyes and gentle smile. But now doubt began to creep in, poisoning every memory he held dear. He thought of Adam now, 23 years old, recently graduated and working at a marketing firm downtown. They had plans to meet for dinner that evening to discuss Adam's ideas for expanding the family business. How could he face his son? Was he even his son? With this earth-shattering information weighing on his conscience, Emily's voice finally broke through his reverie. "Mr. Bennett? Should I call someone? You look pale." Thomas shook his head, trying to compose himself. No, I'm fine," he lied, folding the letter and tucking it into his pocket. "Emily, I need you to handle things here today. I have some personal matters to attend to." Emily nodded, concern still etched on her face. "Of course, Mr. Bennett. Take all the time you need." As Thomas stepped out onto the busy Chicago street, the world seemed different. The familiar sights and sounds of the city he loved now felt alien and threatening. He pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over Sarah's number. She needed to know about this, but how could he possibly tell her? Instead, he dialed another number. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Carter here." "Michael," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help. Can you meet me at the old park near the lake? It's urgent." Michael Carter had been Thomas's best friend since college. Now a private detective, Michael had always been the person Thomas turned to in times of crisis. If anyone could help him make sense of this mess, it was Michael. 30 minutes later, Thomas sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan, the letter clutched in his hands. He watched as Michael's familiar figure approached, his trench coat billowing in the lake breeze. "Thomas," Michael said, taking a seat beside him. "What's going on? You sounded pretty shaken up on the phone." Without a word, Thomas handed over Olivia's letter. He watched as his friend's expression changed from curiosity to disbelief to shock as he read. "Jesus, Thomas," Michael breathed, looking up from the letter. I don't even know what to say." "Do you believe it?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his eyes fixed on the gentle waves of the lake. "I don't know what to believe, Mike. It sounds crazy, but Olivia, she was like family. Why would she lie about something like this?" Michael leaned back, his detective's mind already at work. "Okay, let's think this through. What do you remember about that night? The fire at the cafe?" Thomas closed his eyes, trying to recall the details of a night he'd spent years trying to forget. "It was chaos, Mike. The fire spread so quickly. I was outside talking to the firefighters when I realized Adam was still inside. I tried to go in, but they held me back. And then he just appeared, walking out of the smoke like some kind of miracle." "And you never questioned it? Never noticed anything different about him after that night?" Thomas shook his head. He was traumatized, sure, had nightmares for weeks, but he was still our Adam. At least I thought he was. Michael was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "We need to talk to Olivia. Get the full story from her. And Thomas, you need to tell Sarah." The thought of confronting his ex-wife with this information made Thomas's stomach churn. Their divorce had been amicable, with both of them putting Adam's well-being first. But this could destroy everything. "I know," Thomas said, his voice barely audible. "But how do I even begin that conversation? Hey, Sarah, remember our son? Well, turns out he might not be our son after all. It sounds insane." Michael placed a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder. "One step at a time, buddy. First, we talk to Olivia. Then we figure out how to approach Sarah and Adam. Whatever happens, I've got your back." As they sat there, the bustling city behind them and the vast expanse of the lake before them, Thomas felt a mix of fear and determination. He had built his life on hard work and honesty, creating a warm, welcoming space for his community through his cafes. Now it seemed that the very foundation of his personal life might be built on a lie. "What if it's true, Mike?" Thomas asked, voicing his deepest fear. "What if Adam isn't really our son? What does that mean for all the years we've had together? The love we've shared?" Michael turned to face his friend, his expression serious. "Listen to me, Thomas. Biology isn't everything. You raised that boy. You loved him, supported him, taught him what it means to be a good man. No matter what Olivia's letter says, nothing can change that." Thomas nodded, trying to take comfort in his friend's words, but the questions continued to swirl in his mind. If Adam wasn't his biological son, where did he come from? What happened to the real Adam Bennett? And how would this revelation affect the young man he had always considered his son? As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Thomas and Michael began to formulate a plan. They would start by visiting Olivia, now retired and living in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Then, depending on what they learned, they would decide how to approach Sarah and Adam. Thomas checked his watch, realizing he was supposed to meet Adam for dinner in just a few hours. "I can't face him tonight, Mike, not like this. Not until I know more." Michael nodded in understanding. "I'll call Olivia, set up a meeting for tomorrow. In the meantime, you need to keep it together. Call Adam, make up an excuse for tonight. We'll figure this out, Thomas. I promise." As they stood to leave, Thomas took one last look at the serene lake before them. For 15 years he had believed that the fire at his cafe had been the biggest crisis of his life. Now he realized it was just the beginning of a mystery that threatened to unravel everything he held dear. Little did Thomas know that his search for the truth would uncover secrets far beyond what he could imagine, testing the bonds of family, friendship, and love in ways he never thought possible. As he walked back towards the city, the weight of Olivia's letter heavy in his pocket, Thomas Bennett steeled himself for the journey ahead, a journey that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about family, identity, and the power of unconditional love. The next morning dawned grey and overcast, mirroring Thomas's troubled state of mind. He had barely slept, tossing and turning as Olivia's words echoed in his head. The call to Adam the night before had been one of the hardest conversations of his life. He'd made up a story about an emergency at one of the cafes, hating himself for the lie, but knowing he couldn't face his son until he had more answers. Thomas met Michael outside Olivia's apartment building, a modest structure in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. The detective's face was grim, matching the seriousness of their mission. "You ready for this?" Michael asked, his hand on Thomas's shoulder. Thomas nodded, taking a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. When they reached Olivia's door, Thomas hesitated for a moment before knocking. The sound seemed to echo through the hallway. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened, revealing Olivia Rodriguez. At 58, she still had the warm, maternal presence that Thomas remembered, but her eyes were filled with a sadness he had never seen before. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "I've been expecting you." She ushered them into a small, tidy living room, filled with photos and mementos of a life well lived. Thomas's eyes were immediately drawn to a framed picture on the wall, a younger Olivia, holding a smiling, gap-toothed Adam. The sight made his heart ache. "Olivia," Thomas began, his voice unsteady, "I need to understand. Your letter, is it true? Is Adam not my son?" Olivia sank into an armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's complicated, Thomas. Please sit down, both of you. This is a long story, and not an easy one to tell." As Thomas and Michael settled onto the couch, Olivia took a deep breath and began her tale. "Do you remember the night of the fire, Thomas? It was chaos, smoke everywhere, people screaming. I was there, picking up Adam from the cafe as I did every Thursday. When the fire broke out, I got separated from him in the panic." Thomas nodded, the memories of that terrifying night flooding back. "I remember. I was outside talking to a supplier when it happened. By the time I realized Adam was still inside, the firefighters wouldn't let me in." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "What I'm about to tell you, I've carried this secret for 15 years, and it's eaten away at me every day. When I realized Adam was missing, I ran back into the building. The smoke was so thick I could barely see, and then I heard a child crying." Thomas leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Adam?" Olivia shook her head slowly. "No, Thomas, it wasn't Adam. It was another little boy, about the same age and size. He was terrified. Lost, I made a split-second decision. I picked him up and carried him out." The room fell silent as the weight of Olivia's words sank in. Thomas felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath him. "What are you saying, Olivia? What happened to my son? To the real Adam?" Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Thomas. I looked for him, I swear I did. But the fire was spreading so quickly. When I got outside with the other boy, everyone assumed it was Adam. He was so scared and confused he didn't say anything. And then it was too late to go back." Michael, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Olivia, do you realize what you're admitting to? This is incredibly serious." Olivia nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I know. I've lived with this guilt for 15 years, but you have to understand, in that moment, all I could think about was saving a child's life. I never meant for it to go on for so long, but as time passed, it became harder and harder to tell the truth." Thomas stood up abruptly, pacing the small room. His mind was reeling, trying to process this unthinkable information. "So you're telling me that the boy I've raised, the young man I had dinner with just last week, isn't my son? That my real son, my Adam, might have—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Olivia reached out, her hand trembling. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. I know there's nothing I can say to make this right, but please believe me when I say that I loved Adam, both Adams, like they were my own. I never meant to cause so much pain." As Thomas struggled to come to terms with Olivia's revelation, Michael's detective instincts kicked in. "Olivia, the boy you rescued, do you know anything about where he came from? Did he ever say anything about his real family?" Olivia shook her head. "He was so young and traumatized by the fire. By the time he started to feel safe, he had already accepted Thomas and Sarah as his parents. I think his mind might have blocked out his earlier memories." Thomas turned back to face Olivia, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "We need to know the truth, Olivia, all of it. What about Sarah? Did she know?" Olivia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Not at first. But a few years after the fire, she started to suspect something wasn't right. Adam had some medical issues that didn't match up with your family history. She confronted me, and I couldn't lie to her. I told her everything." This new revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. Sarah knew. All this time, and she never told me. She was protecting Adam. "And you," Olivia explained. "She was afraid of what the truth might do to your family. We both were." Michael stood up, his mind already formulating a plan. "Okay, we need to approach this systematically. Olivia, we'll need any information you can remember about that night. Anything that might help us trace the real identity of the boy you rescued. And Thomas, we need to talk to Sarah. She might have information that could help us understand what really happened. Thomas nodded numbly, still trying to process everything he'd learned. The son he'd raised, the boy he'd taught to ride a bike, the young man he'd watched graduate from college, was a stranger. And his real son, the baby he'd held in his arms, might have been lost in that fire 15 years ago. As they prepared to leave Olivia's apartment, Thomas turned back to the woman who had been like family for so many years. Olivia, I don't know how to feel right now, but I need you to understand something. Whatever happened that night, whatever mistakes were made, Adam is my son. Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. I need to know the truth for both of us. Olivia nodded, tears still glistening in her eyes. I understand, Thomas, and I'll do whatever I can to help make this right. As Thomas and Michael made their way back to the city, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. They had to uncover the truth about what happened that night 15 years ago, but they also had to decide how and when to approach Adam with this life-altering information. What do I do, Mike? Thomas asked as they drove, his voice filled with anguish. How do I tell Adam that everything he knows about himself might be a lie? Michael sighed heavily. I don't know, buddy, but what I do know is that we need more information before we do anything. Let's talk to Sarah first, see what she knows. Then we can decide how to proceed. As they navigated the busy Chicago streets, Thomas's mind raced with questions. Who was the boy he had raised as his son? What happened to the real Adam Bennett? And how would this revelation affect the family he had built and loved for over 2 decades? Little did Thomas know that the answers to these questions would lead him down a path he never expected, uncovering secrets that had been buried for years and testing the very definition of what it means to be a family. As the city skyline loomed before them, Thomas steeled himself for the difficult conversations and revelations that lay ahead, clinging to the hope that somehow, someway, love would be enough to see them through this crisis. The next step was clear. They needed to talk to Sarah. But as Thomas thought about confronting his ex-wife with what he had learned, he realized that this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of family. The drive to Sarah's house felt like the longest journey of Thomas's life. Each familiar street corner and landmark seemed to mock him with memories of a past that now felt like a lie. As Michael pulled up to the modest 2-story home where Sarah lived, Thomas's heart raced with a mixture of anxiety and anger. You want me to come in with you? Michael asked, his hand resting on the steering wheel. Thomas shook his head. No, I need to do this alone, but stay close, okay? I might need you after. With a deep breath, Thomas walked up the familiar path to the front door. He hesitated for a moment before ringing the doorbell, the sound echoing in his ears like a death knell for the life he thought he knew. Sarah opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. At 50, she was still beautiful, with laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of a life well lived. But as she took in Thomas's expression, her face fell. Thomas, what's wrong? She asked, concern evident in her voice. We need to talk, Sarah, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. About Adam. The color drained from Sarah's face. Without a word, she stepped aside, allowing Thomas to enter the home they once shared. As they settled into the living room, surrounded by family photos and mementos of their life together, the weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the air. You knew, Thomas said, his voice a mix of accusation and disbelief. All these years you knew that Adam wasn't our son. Sarah's hands trembled as she clasped them in her lap. Thomas, how did you find out? Olivia wrote me a letter, he replied, watching as Sarah's face crumpled with the realization that their carefully guarded secret was out. She told me everything, Sarah. About the fire, about the boy she rescued. How could you keep this from me? Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. I wanted to tell you, Thomas. God, you have no idea how many times I came close. But every time I looked at Adam, saw how much you loved him, how happy our family was, I couldn't bring myself to destroy that. Thomas leaned forward, his voice urgent. But what about our real son, Sarah? What about the Adam we lost that night? Sarah's sob broke the tension in the room. I don't know, Thomas. I've asked myself that question every day for the past 15 years. When I first suspected something wasn't right, when I confronted Olivia and learned the truth, I was devastated. But by then, the boy we were raising, he was our son in every way that mattered. As Sarah's words hung in the air, Thomas felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, grief, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of loss for a child he never truly got to know. But beneath it all, there was also love. Love for the boy he had raised, regardless of biology. "What do we do now, Sarah?" Thomas asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How do we tell Adam? And what about our biological son? Should we try to find out what happened to him?" Sarah reached out, taking Thomas's hand in hers. It was a gesture so familiar, yet now tinged with the weight of their shared secret. "I don't know, Thomas, but whatever we do, we need to think about Adam. The Adam we raised. This will change his entire world." As they sat there, grappling with the enormity of their situation, a knock at the door startled them both. Sarah rose to answer it, returning moments later with Michael in tow. "Sorry to interrupt," Michael said, his detective's instincts clearly sensing the tension in the room, "but I think I might have found something." Thomas and Sarah exchanged a glance before turning their attention to Michael. "What is it?" Thomas asked. Michael pulled out his phone, pulling up a series of old news articles. "I've been doing some digging into the night of the fire. There was more going on that night than we realized. The cafe wasn't the only fire in the city." Sarah leaned in, her eyes scanning the headlines Michael showed them. Multiple fires across Chicago. Suspected arson, orphanage evacuation. Her voice trailed off as the implications sank in. "An orphanage?" Thomas asked, his mind racing. "You think—" Michael nodded gravely. "It's possible. The orphanage was just a few blocks from your cafe, Thomas. In the chaos of that night, with multiple fires and evacuations happening simultaneously, it's conceivable that children could have been separated from their groups." The room fell silent as they all considered the possibility. Could the boy Olivia rescued, the boy they had raised as Adam, have been from that orphanage? And if so, what did that mean for their biological son? "We need to investigate this further," Michael said, breaking the silence. "There might be records, witnesses from that night who could shed some light on what really happened." Thomas nodded, a newfound determination replacing his earlier despair. "Yes, we need to know the truth for Adam's sake. Both Adams." Sarah squeezed Thomas's hand. "Whatever we find out, we need to be careful. Adam, our Adam, he's built his whole life on who he thinks he is. Learning the truth could devastate him." As they began to formulate a plan, discussing how to delve deeper into the events of that fateful night without arousing suspicion, Thomas's phone buzzed with a text message. His heart nearly stopped when he saw it was from Adam. "Dad, is everything okay? You've been acting strange lately. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? There's something I want to talk to you about." Thomas showed the message to Sarah and Michael, a look of panic crossing his face. "What do I do? How can I face him knowing what we know?" Sarah placed a comforting hand on his arm. "We can't avoid him forever, Thomas. Maybe this is an opportunity to gauge how he's feeling, if he's noticed anything unusual." Michael nodded in agreement. "Sarah's right. Meet with him, Thomas. Act as normal as possible. We need more time to investigate before we even consider telling him the truth." With a heavy heart, Thomas replied to Adam's message, agreeing to meet at their favorite coffee shop, not one of Thomas's own cafes, but a small, cozy place where they often met to talk. As the day wore on, Thomas, Sarah, and Michael continued to piece together what they knew, making plans to dig deeper into the events surrounding the fire. They reached out to old contacts, pored over newspaper archives, and tried to track down anyone who might have information about the orphanage evacuation. But even as they worked, a sense of unease settled over them. They were unraveling a mystery that had been buried for 15 years, and there was no telling what other secrets they might uncover in the process. As evening fell, Thomas prepared to leave Sarah's house, his mind whirling with everything he had learned and the daunting task that lay ahead. Just as he was about to walk out the door, Sarah called out to him. "Thomas, wait," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Whatever happens, whatever we discover, Adam is our son. Maybe not by blood, but by choice, by love. We raised him. We loved him. We shaped him into the man he is today. That has to count for something." Thomas nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I know, Sarah. I can't help but think about the son we lost, the life we might have had." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I think about him every day, but we can't change the past, Thomas. All we can do is move forward, try to uncover the truth, and hope that our love, for both our sons, is strong enough to weather whatever storms are coming." As Thomas stepped out into the cool Chicago evening, he felt as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice. Tomorrow's meeting with Adam loomed large in his mind, a reminder of the delicate balance they were trying to maintain between truth and love, past and present. Little did he know that Adam's request to meet wasn't just a casual check-in. The young man had his own revelations to share, ones that would add yet another layer to the already complex web of secrets and lies that surrounded their family. As Thomas drove home, the city lights blurring through his tear-filled eyes, he couldn't help but wonder how many more surprises lay in store, and whether the bonds of family could truly withstand the weight of so many hidden truths. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions swirling within Thomas as he made his way to meet Adam. The familiar chime of the coffee shop's door did little to calm his nerves as he stepped inside, scanning the cozy interior for his son. Adam was already there, seated at their usual corner table, a steaming mug of coffee in front of him. At 23, he was the spitting image of Sarah with her warm brown eyes and gentle smile. The sight of him made Thomas's heart ache with a confusing mixture of love and uncertainty. "Dad," Adam said, standing to greet him with a hug, "I'm glad you could make it." Thomas returned the embrace, trying to ignore the voice in his head that whispered, "Is he really your son?" He settled into the chair across from Adam, forcing a smile. "Of course, son, you said you wanted to talk about something." Adam nodded, a hint of nervousness crossing his face. "Yeah, I do. But first, is everything okay with you? You've seemed distracted lately. Is there something going on with the cafes?" Thomas felt a pang of guilt at the concern in Adam's voice. No, the cafes are fine. I've just had a lot on my mind lately, but never mind that. What did you want to talk about?" Adam took a deep breath, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "Well, I've been doing some thinking about my future, about my place in the family business." Thomas leaned forward, curious despite his inner turmoil. "Oh? I thought you were happy at the marketing firm." "I am, but—" Adam paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Dad, I've always felt this connection to your cafes, to the family legacy. I think I want to be more involved. Maybe even take over someday if you'd let me." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. The family legacy. If only Adam knew the truth about his place in that legacy. Thomas struggled to keep his expression neutral as Adam continued. "There's something else," Adam said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I've been having these dreams. Memories, maybe, I'm not sure. But they're about the night of the fire at the cafe when I was a kid." Thomas's heart nearly stopped. What kind of dreams?" Adam's brow furrowed in concentration. "They're hazy but intense. I smell smoke, hear screaming. But the strangest part is, in these dreams, I'm not at the cafe. I'm somewhere else, somewhere unfamiliar. There are other children around me and we're all being rushed out of a building." The blood drained from Thomas's face as he realized what Adam might be describing. Could these be memories of the orphanage, of his life before that fateful night? "Have you talked to your mother about these dreams?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Adam shook his head. "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Dad, do you think these could be real memories from that night?" Thomas reached across the table, taking Adam's hand in his own. The gesture was as much to steady himself as it was to comfort his son. "Adam, there's something I need to tell you. Something about that night, about our family." But before Thomas could continue, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out, ready to ignore the call, but froze when he saw Michael's name on the screen. "I'm sorry, son, I need to take this. It's important," Thomas said, his heart racing as he stepped away from the table to answer the call. "Mike, this isn't a good time. I'm with Adam, and—" Michael's urgent voice cut him off. "Thomas, you need to get down to the old orphanage site right now. We've found something. Something big." Thomas glanced back at Adam, who was watching him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "I can't just leave, Mike. I was about to—" "Trust me, Thomas," Michael interrupted. "You need to see this before you say anything to Adam. It changes everything." With a heavy sigh, Thomas ended the call and returned to the table. "Adam, I'm so sorry. There's an emergency I need to deal with. Can we continue this conversation later? It's important, I promise." Adam nodded, though Thomas could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes. "Sure, Dad, is everything okay?" "I hope so," Thomas replied, hating himself for the half-truth. "I'll call you later, okay? And Adam, I love you. Never forget that." As Thomas rushed out of the coffee shop, leaving a bewildered Adam behind, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. Whatever Michael had found at the old orphanage site could be the key to unraveling the mystery that had consumed their lives for the past few days. 20 minutes later, Thomas pulled up to a fenced-off lot where the orphanage once stood. The building had been demolished years ago, replaced by an empty field overgrown with weeds. Michael was waiting for him, along with a woman Thomas didn't recognize. "Thomas, this is Clara Johnson," Michael said as Thomas approached. "She used to work at the orphanage. Clara, this is Thomas Bennett." Clara, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and silver hair, extended her hand. "Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry for what you and your family have been through." Thomas shook her hand, confusion evident on his face. "I don't understand. What's going on, Mike?" Michael gestured to a stack of old weathered boxes at their feet. "Clara has been holding on to these for years. They're records from the orphanage, including from the night of the fire." Clara nodded, her expression solemn. "When the orphanage was closed down, I couldn't bear to see these records destroyed. They were children's lives, you see. Their stories. I've kept them safe all these years, hoping they might someday help reunite families." Thomas's heart raced as he knelt down to examine the boxes. "And you found something about Adam? About what happened that night?" Michael and Clara exchanged a glance before Michael spoke. "It's complicated, Thomas. There were two Adams at the orphanage that night. Adam Bennett and Adam Reeves, both 8 years old, both with brown hair and eyes." Thomas felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "Two Adams? I don't understand." Clara gently pulled out a yellowed file from one of the boxes. "According to our records, Adam Bennett, your son, was brought to the orphanage just days before the fire. His mother had passed away, and there was no other family to take him in. But the night of the fire, in all the chaos of the evacuation, the two Adams were mixed up," Michael finished, his voice grave. "One was rescued by Olivia and ended up with you and Sarah. The other—" Thomas could barely breathe as he looked at Michael, dreading the answer but needing to know. "The other what, Mike?" Michael placed a comforting hand on Thomas's shoulder. "The other Adam, Adam Reeves, was adopted by a family in Michigan a few weeks after the fire. We've tracked him down, Thomas. He's alive." The world seemed to spin around Thomas as he processed this information. Two Adams. One his biological son, raised by strangers. The other, the boy he'd loved and raised as his own for 15 years. Both alive, both with lives and families of their own. "What do we do now?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Bennett, I know this is overwhelming, but those boys, both of them, deserve to know the truth about their origins, about the families they lost and the families they gained." Thomas nodded slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He thought of Adam, his Adam, waiting for answers about his strange dreams and his place in the family. He thought of another young man out there, living a life without knowing his true heritage. "We need to tell them," Thomas said finally, his voice gaining strength. "Both of them. They deserve to know the truth, no matter how difficult it might be." As Thomas stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of an uncertain future, he realized that the true test of family was just beginning. The journey ahead would be fraught with emotional landmines, difficult conversations, and potentially heartbreaking choices. But as he looked at Michael and Clara, as he thought of Sarah and the two young men whose lives had been so irrevocably intertwined, Thomas felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, in uncovering the truth, they could forge a new kind of family, one built on honesty, understanding, and the unbreakable bonds of love that transcend biology. With renewed determination, Thomas pulled out his phone. It was time to call Sarah, to bring Adam in on the truth, and to begin the delicate process of reaching out to the other Adam, the son he had lost and found in the span of a few tumultuous days. As he dialed Sarah's number, Thomas took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, the chance for healing, reconciliation, and a new chapter in their family's story. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of emotions, revelations, and life-changing conversations. Thomas felt as if he were living in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, as he, Sarah, and Michael worked to unravel the tangled web of their family's past and present. The hardest conversation by far had been with Adam. Thomas and Sarah had sat him down in the living room of their old family home, surrounded by photos and memories of a life they had all believed to be true. As they gently explained the situation, Adam's face had cycled through a range of emotions: disbelief, anger, confusion, and finally, a deep, aching sadness. "So, I'm not really your son?" Adam had asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah had reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Adam, listen to me. You are our son in every way that matters. We raised you, we loved you, we watched you grow into the amazing young man you are today. Nothing can change that." Thomas had nodded in agreement, his own eyes brimming with tears. "Your mother's right, Adam. Biology doesn't define family. Love does. And we love you unconditionally." It had taken time, days of long emotional conversations, tears, and even moments of laughter as they reminisced about their life together. But slowly, Adam began to come to terms with the truth of his origins. His dreams, he realized, were indeed memories of his early life at the orphanage. "I want to meet him," Adam had said one evening, surprising both Thomas and Sarah. "The other Adam, my biological parents' son. Is that okay?" The question had led to another complex journey, reaching out to Adam Reeves, the young man who had grown up in Michigan, unaware of his true heritage. Michael's detective skills had been invaluable in making the initial contact, explaining the situation with sensitivity and care. Now, on a warm Sunday afternoon, Thomas stood in the backyard of his home, watching as two young men, mirror images of each other in so many ways, stood face to face for the first time. Adam Bennett and Adam Reeves, biological strangers, but bound by a twist of fate neither could have imagined. "This is weird," Adam Reeves said with a nervous laugh, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar to Thomas it made his heart ache. His Adam, the son he had raised, nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's like looking in a mirror, but you know, a mirror that makes slightly different life choices." He gestured to Adam Reeves' Michigan State sweatshirt with a grin. As the two young men began to talk, their initial awkwardness giving way to genuine curiosity and connection, Thomas felt Sarah's hand slip into his own. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. Thomas squeezed her hand, his eyes never leaving the two Adams. "It's surreal, but I think we're going to be okay, all of us." The days that followed were filled with long conversations, shared meals, and the gradual forging of new bonds. Adam Reeves shared stories of his adoptive family in Michigan, loving parents who had given him a happy childhood, unaware of the circumstances that had brought him into their lives. There were tears as he learned about his biological parents, but also a sense of gratitude for the twists of fate that had shaped his life. For Adam Bennett, the experience was equally transformative. Learning about his early years in the orphanage, connecting with Clara Johnson to hear stories of his biological parents, helped him fill in the missing pieces of his identity. And yet, as he watched Thomas and Sarah, the only parents he had ever known, navigate this complex situation with love and grace, he felt his connection to them grow even stronger. One evening, as the extended family sat around the dinner table, Thomas, Sarah, both Adams, and even Michael and Clara joining them, Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not the one we were born into, but the one we choose, the one we build with love and understanding. To second chances and new beginnings." As glasses clinked and smiles were shared around the table, Thomas felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still many conversations to be had, relationships to be redefined, and emotions to be processed. But looking at the faces around him, he knew that they would face whatever came next together. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new normal. Adam Bennett, true to his word, became more involved in the family business, bringing fresh ideas and enthusiasm to Thomas's chain of cafes. His marketing experience proved invaluable as they worked to expand and modernize the business. Adam Reeves, while maintaining his life and career in Michigan, became a regular visitor to Chicago. He and Adam Bennett formed a unique bond, part brothers, part friends, united by their shared history and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Thomas and Sarah, though no longer married, found their relationship strengthening as they navigated this new family dynamic together. Their shared love for both Adams and their commitment to honesty and openness helped heal old wounds and forge a new kind of partnership. 1 year after the truth had come to light, Thomas stood behind the counter of his original cafe, the very place where this journey had begun. The morning rush was in full swing, the air filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and the chatter of customers. As he handed a steaming latte to a regular, Thomas caught sight of a familiar face entering the cafe. It was Olivia Rodriguez, looking older and more frail than he remembered, but with the same warm smile that had comforted Adam, both Adams, so many years ago. "Olivia," Thomas said, coming around the counter to greet her, "it's good to see you." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at him. "Thomas, I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome here. After everything—" Thomas took her hand gently, leading her to a quiet table in the corner. "Olivia, you're always welcome here. You're part of this story, part of our family, whether you like it or not." As they sat down, Thomas saw Adam, his Adam, emerge from the back office. The young man's face lit up when he saw Olivia, and he quickly made his way over. "Nana Liv," Adam said. Using the old nickname he had given her as a child, he bent down to embrace her, and Thomas saw Olivia's shoulders shake with silent sobs. "Oh, my sweet boy," she whispered. "Can you ever forgive me?" Adam pulled back, his eyes shining with tears, but a smile on his face. "There's nothing to forgive, Nana Liv. You saved me that night. You gave me a family, a life filled with love. How could I not be grateful for that?" As Thomas watched Adam comfort Olivia, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Despite the pain, the confusion, and the upheaval of the past year, they had emerged stronger, their definition of family expanded and enriched. The cafe buzzed with life around them, customers coming and going, staff bustling about, the espresso machine hissing in the background. It was an ordinary day in many ways, and yet Thomas knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. He thought of Sarah, who was probably teaching her class at that very moment, of Adam Reeves pursuing his career in Michigan but always just a phone call away, of Michael and Clara, who had become dear friends through this ordeal, and of the two young men who now shared a unique bond, their lives intertwined in ways no one could have predicted. As he excused himself to return to work, leaving Adam and Olivia to their reunion, Thomas paused for a moment to take in the scene. His cafe, his family, his life, all had been transformed by the truth that had come to light. But rather than tearing them apart, it had brought them together in new and beautiful ways. Thomas smiled to himself as he tied on his apron and prepared to dive back into the morning rush. Life, he had learned, was full of surprises. Some were painful, some were joyous, but all of them offered the opportunity for growth, for love, and for the creation of a family bound not by blood but by choice. As he brewed another batch of coffee, filling the air with its rich aroma, Thomas felt a sense of contentment settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, as a family, in all its complex, beautiful, and unexpected forms.